Ashish, hello. Nice to meet you. It's good to see you today. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me, April.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to chat. Usually when we do these webinars, I'm giving a demo or talking about the product. And today I get the opportunity to interview you. So we're turning the tables on this a little bit. I'm excited about it. So
I'm excited as
for
well.
everyone joining, I just met you. All we've done is exchange the names of our lovely fur friends and done a bit of introduction. I know that you know my teammate David, our co-founder at Dasera, and you guys have done an awesome podcast before, but we just met, so I'm really excited to ask you a few questions. Can we get started?
Yeah, I'm excited as well. Let's get into it.
Awesome. Everyone, nice to meet you. I'm April Mitchell. I am the Vice President of Engineering and Operations at Dasera. We are a cloud data security startup, and Ashish is a colleague, a new colleague of mine. So Ashish, introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about you and your background.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Ashish Rajan. I am the host of Cloud Security Podcast. Well, that's my weekend job. That's probably not my day job. My day job is I work as a CISO or head of security for a tech company where I get to work with multiple cloud providers and I get to talk about cloud all day and cybersecurity at the same time. So that's my 9 to 5. When I'm not doing my 9 to 5, I am the host of a very popular top 10 ranked, top 100 ranked in the US, UK, and Australia podcast called Cloud Security Podcast.
That is awesome. I have watched it. Also, a recent episode that you and David recorded while I was driving on a recent trip, and really enjoyed it. I'm always out, searching for data security podcasts for Security Talk. So it's an awesome one to check out. I know we'll include the link here so others can follow along. I want to ask you some questions about cloud security. It's an unsolved problem. My background has been in research. It's been at Cisco, at large networking companies, and security is a challenge when you think about infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is on-prem, it's mixed, it's cloud, it's hybrid. Why is it still an open challenge, an unsolved problem, decades into this?
I think it's a human problem, basically. That just because we have a new toy or a new technology doesn't make us any different. I definitely find that, I guess, adding complexity or adding a few more layers, maybe taking a step back, because the whole idea behind cloud was we're abstracting the complexity of running a data center on your own, and you should be able to have access to hardware whenever you need. And securing that, we did that for good 25 plus years. And we finally realized, actually, there's a much better way to do this. We should do this in cloud. But turns out we didn't really upgrade ourselves. We just upgraded the way we did things. And we still carried the same problems along. So I'm sure we'll get into the kind of challenges that exist. But I found that humans were the main problems to start off with, because of which we ended up having silos, or continue to have silos, I must say, between on-premise and cloud. We also started ignoring other team members in terms of we should share information, share responsibility, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I definitely feel humans were the first one to start out the problem.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way of thinking that it's a human problem, and in that sense, it's also a human opportunity. We can solve it if we're the ones causing it. When I think about the advantages of now that we've gone to the cloud, and specifically in the challenges we're looking at are around data, and you think of data and you immediately tie it to security, to risk, to not wanting to lose it. But there are all the benefits of data, the analytics that you can get from it, of the context that it gives you. When you think of data security, you want to unlock that potential and free humans to be in the loop and use it, not just have to lock it away. Are there any specific challenges or the opportunities that we have when we think of data security in the cloud?
Yeah, I can name a few for sure. I think the first ones that come to mind, and a lot of people still don't do this, is just basic, simple data classification. It's a big problem because a lot of people just have this broad category of sensitive, non-sensitive. Even access control, for that matter, is also a challenge. Just because I happen to be a CISO, I would get extra access, even though I keep telling people I don't want extra access. Like things like that as well happen quite a bit, because you feel, at least a lot of companies go down the path of, I guess, creating silos where you have people who have access to, I guess, access to a lot of data as well as a lot of resources, but there's no clear responsibility for what's my responsibility for a particular data classification. Like if it's like a personal
Mhm.
identifiable information, how do I am I responsible for it, or my privacy officer is responsible for it? Is it legal? There's confusion around that as well. So I think that those are some of the first ones that come to mind. But I mean, I can keep going on about this, so to be honest.
Yeah, no, classifications one we often hear about. There is, what type of data do I have? You mentioned access control. If you think of how do people get to my data, and then how does my data get out, and how do I keep it from going out? So we often hear of it as a spectrum of where people can access it and how it leaves. But then there's that whole middle part, and you were touching on a lot of it there, which is, oh, I've given access, but now you may not need it anymore. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that's removed? And now that I've given you access, oh, it's the cloud. Look, one button and I
Oh,
can copy it 5 places. Ah,
it's funny. Maybe we should blame DevOps to some extent for this. The idea behind DevOps was that we should have speed to, I guess we should have access to as many things as possible, as quickly as possible, so we can release new features and new products as quickly as possible as well. Then, because what people didn't realize was as we were kind of automating and going super fast and providing all this data across the board, there was a data sprawl issue as well that came up, which I think which is probably a great example for where you were coming from as well. The data sprawl, where data is basically just laid out everywhere. I may have a copy of the exact same data that 10 other people have a copy of. I may think I'm secure because I am the only one with this copy, but turns out there are 6 more people with the same copy of the data as well.
yeah. Yeah. If I'm looking in one place and I have that lens on it and I'm like, well, she should have access to it. Good, check. We're covered. Well, meanwhile, we've got 3 other copies with 15 other people in whole different, configurations of how they have access. Oh, and by the way, next week, one of them doesn't work here and we have 2 new people who do. That complexity, it can get you. But I see where I like the advantage of, the cloud does make it easy. The temporal nature of data changes, and the access to that nature changes it. And we don't want to remove that or restrict it, because that's the benefit. Like, I need to be able to spin up a couple of new data stores and test this out, and get my team the details they need. Classification, you got one. Sprawl. Are there other areas? Or you mentioned silos, which I think is an
Yeah,
interesting
I
one
think
to dive
that's
into.
definitely an interesting one, because when I talk about data security in the industry, a lot of the times the confusion around responsibility for like the data sprawl thing, if you just expand that example a bit more, where if you talk to a security person, they'll just say, hey, I have a DLP solution, like a data leakage prevention solution. But what they don't talk about is the fact that, hey, DLP only restricts itself to certain parts of your environment. Like, for example, it may do some decent or maybe even a good job at your email level. It may do some more on file directories, but there's certain parts, like, for example, the cloud environment by itself. I haven't heard of a DLP solution just for cloud. I don't even know how or where would you start at that point if there was a solution. I don't know. Maybe this Dasera could be the answer over here, but I think the way I saw it always is that the challenge that you kind of are created with responsibility for security, being responsible for data security fully, but technically they're not the only ones, because just because they have a DLP solution that they had a budget approved for, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's their responsibility now.
The shared responsibility, there's shared responsibility and shared blame. It's like when you're talking to your kids, oh, she did it, he did it, well, who's responsible for it? Who's the parent in this situation? And I know you meet with a lot of CISOs. You are a CISO, you work with a lot of groups, like within companies. Where is that responsible organization, or who are those responsible teams? How have you seen them collaborate in ways that work, or maybe ways that don't, so that we can, as you're looking to solve this problem, how do these teams coordinate both in responsibility and budget, and in ownership?
I think that's a good question. I probably would say it's not great. I'll be honest, and I think the partly the industry is to be blamed for this as well, because we haven't had a lot of conversation about data security in cloud specifically. Like, there's a lot of legal requirements like GDPR from a privacy perspective. There are privacy laws around this as well. So by nature, a lot of people have assumed that if you have your legal and privacy department, or privacy department, I must say,
Mhm.
privacy department, they are all working together on this, then you're covered. But in
Yeah.
reality, if you think about how budget is allocated, there's no separate budget allocated for data security. Like when I, in any of my previous roles, and I'm pretty sure most of the organizations that I've spoken to with CISOs, there's no separate budget for data security because it's not looked at as a challenge to solve. And this is probably an education piece because what we are looking at the moment is, hey, we should be releasing products every day. We should be, the industry seems to focus more on doing multiple deployments on the same day rather than we should be able to just at least know what kind of data is hosted somewhere. Like the Log4j vulnerability that came out a few days ago. And the first thing that people wanted to figure out is how do I know if I'm affected by this? And how much data could potentially be exposed by that? No, that's a question that no one had an answer for. People were just too busy scrambling for how do I close this black hole that's being created? But there is a data element that was completely untouched at that point. And only when you start talking about publicly, actually, yeah, I wonder if data was actually leaked, or if you go back to the data sprawl problem, how much of the data which I thought was with Ashish, but it's not with Ashish, but was accidentally with another person, and that's been leaked across, I would not even know because Ashish is safe.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean that was a good example. We've all just lived through it. You bring it up, it's a little fresh. It's a little fresh. So I know many people listening to this are dealt with it or are still dealing with it. But you had first the awareness that a new vulnerability was out. Then you had to find the teams that actually knew, are we exposed here? Is our products exposed? Which customers are exposed? Then you had, the engineering group that need to go fix it, figure out what the solution is. You've got the team that's got to communicate with, you got to coordinate across all of those. That's just one example of a new vulnerability that's coming out. I mean, we're hearing about, vulnerabilities, breaches that happen all the time. When you're thinking of your data security solution, it needs to have information relevant for each of those teams. You've got to provision it in a way where the right people know the right information and aren't crowded with the information they don't need. For example, our privacy group or communications team doesn't need to know how to fix the vulnerability. They need to know when it's been fixed and how to inform from there. So it's a massive amount of coordination. If you only have one view of that slice, then you're missing a bigger picture.
100%. I think it's amazing how everyone was quick to jump on to identify the assets. I think one thing we forgot, and it's a great thought exercise for people to go through whenever there's a breach. For them to think about from a perspective of, is my risk profile based on the data that the application has, or is it more based on if this application makes us as a company money or not? Because a lot of people make risk profiles based on whether my application, this is the money maker app versus this is probably the most sensitive application because this holds all the PII. If this goes out, we're screwed, right? So it'll be really interesting how many people actually classify their risk profile based on that.
That's an interesting way to think about the risk profile. Another slice is that time you spend answering those questions. That, I hear the mean time to solution and how quickly can I get to my answer, just the time that teams may have spent, cycling to understand how exposed are we, how are we exposed, and what are the implications going to be. Yeah. So I know we've been chatting for a bit, but I'm going to bring us around to Dasera so that we can talk about our solution. So we secure the entire data lifecycle. So we don't just think about ingress and egress. We are actually looking at data security from the time that data is created to while it's in use, throughout its use to all the way through archive and deletion. And we really want to provide both visibility and context into your data so that it can be used safely and securely. So I know you and David chatted before. You've seen our demo. You've heard about the product. We were just talking about these gaps in cloud data security. How do you think Dasera can stack up against some of these challenges?
I think, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I only know Dasera in the solution space at this point in time. So probably
I like it. That's good. You're not an expert.
Maybe it's a good thing, I guess. Maybe it's a good thing, I guess. But I do wanted to say that at least the ones that has come to my mind, it has been Dasera, which is how I ended up having a chat with David as well. But it definitely stacks up against most of the challenges that we were talking about, at least having that visibility for data that you mentioned earlier, I think that's probably quite key. And I just want to bring it back to the whole Log4j thing as well. If that visibility would have been available, and when decisions are being made for what's given a priority, we probably would be able to see that, hey, we should have used this as a metrics rather than like the data as a metrics rather than just relying on the fact that this is a moneymaker app. This is where the customer's logging in. So I definitely feel it stacks up quite well. And I actually, funny enough, as I said, I only know of Dasera. I probably should Google more. I should have just Googled what other competitors Dasera have.
I can tell you a little bit about it. I think you're right on it. You hit on classification and we hit on how data is used and being able to protect that data while it's in use. I've described it to folks before that I've talked to around kind of some key questions that it can help answer. So one of those is, where are my databases? When I'm operating in the cloud, data sprawl came up before, it's easy to one click, move my sensitive data around. Where does the data that I have exist? Is that data sensitive? We want to help you answer that question very easily so that you know not just where your data is, but your sensitive data is. How is that data being used? Is it being used in the right way with those who have the right privileges and those that have the right privileges today, not yesterday or 2 weeks ago? Is the data protected? Is it configured? Is it backed up? Is it encrypted? When it's easy to create in a way that it could be insecure. And I want that help that reminds me, oh, morning, fix this one. But it's got to go to the right team. And then, where is every copy? Because it's not going to just be here where it starts. It can be many different places later on. So you're right on it. Now that you're the expert. Yeah.
That's like take data sprawl, take access control, take silo conversation to be at least bringing them together, take shared responsibility, take as well. Well, I was like, that's 5 for 5. That's oh, there you go. No wonder I don't know any other solution apart from Dasera then.
So now that you're the expert, you know what we offer. Let's say I know you're big on I heard you and David talking about your foodies. You guys have massive respect for good food and good coffee. So let's say you're sitting at your favorite coffee shop, maybe at the next event you're going to be at, and you're sitting down and one of your colleagues strolls in and you are like, oh man, I got to tell you about Dasera. Who is that colleague? What's his role? And what type of industry is he from or she from that you might tell about Dasera?
Yeah, so I would expect he or she to be more from an enterprise space. And I think the reason I say enterprise space is because usually if it's a small tech company, they probably would be going down the security certification path. That would force them down the path of having some kind of classification, but they may not have the resources to be able to, or at least they would not need the scale to have that kind of differentiation. So I guess there's one machine doing 10 people's job. I guess that's how I would treat that. But from an enterprise perspective, it makes more sense where it may be a global organization or a financial tech organization, like a fintech, where they have responsibilities for holding a really large amount of data, doing a lot of transactions, which are time sensitive, but at the same time, if my bank details were out on the internet, and you can multiply by the population of the country that you may be operating in, and maybe multiple countries you may be operating in. So I would definitely put fintechs and the banks in that space. From a role perspective, if it was a CISO colleague of mine, I'll probably ask them the question around, what do you guys do for data security outside of DLP at the moment? And just to spark that conversation. And if the answer is we have a privacy team and a legal team, then I'll try to introduce them to the concept of, actually, how do you check the classification within your cloud environment? Do you actually have a checklist that you go through? And another role that I would probably bring this up with is a chief data officer role. And this is something that I've found, which is really interesting, where a lot of the organizations are slowly recognizing, similar to ways to when DevOps was becoming its thing. I definitely find that over the past 2-3 years, there's a lot more data roles coming up. And I think they definitely would play a lot of part in, especially if they're part of a fintech company or an enterprise where they deal with a lot of PII and a lot of customer information, which could be sensitive. I think they would definitely find if GDPR compliance would also start creeping in. I think worthwhile calling out, there is a change coming to compliance standards as well, which is going to include a lot of data privacy as well, from my understanding. By the way, these are rumors. I'm not an expert, but these are rumors from people who actually contributed into that certification update. So it'll be really interesting how, if that creates few more roles which are maybe within the CISO realm or maybe broader in the organization, like a chief data officer, maybe to my mind, comes as a role where they're responsible for all data across the organization and also are responsible for security of it. Because imagine we are in a scenario in trying to figure out, is Ashish with the only copy of data? But how do you kind of mass communicate that unless you actually knew where to start? So maybe those are some of the roles I would look at, and those are some of the questions I'll ask them.
Yeah, I love that concept of chief data officer. I'm like, man, what a cool title, because we know the CISOs, we know of governance, when you're getting into the legal issues, when you're getting into the compliance issues, financial issues, tracking sensitive data, health, and protected health information, and it spans different roles. But having, a privacy team, a privacy officer that's likely going to be interested or involved in the conversation, a data officer, because I see that role of the data officer not just in securing it, but in making sure the data is accessible. And I would say that is an approach that Dasera takes, to not just say, here's how your data is protected, but we're doing that in a way where your team can still use it and get the benefit from it. Because if the data is locked down, no one, hey, it's over here in this nice data lake that no one can ever access, we're good. You're not going to get all the value that you need from it. So that was great. Next time you're having coffee, please mention Dasera. That would be awesome. As we wrap up today, I'm hopeful that we've got probably some CISOs listening in, maybe some DevOps practitioners who have joined, maybe others who are just really interested and want to help solve the open, innovative questions that exist in security right now. Any parting words for them, or thoughts of advice as they're tackling cloud security challenges?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think this is kind of where I started the first time I started thinking about this, and maybe this would be a good starting point for a lot of people if they haven't really started thinking about this yet. A lot of times, the simplest way to start is just to define data classifications within the organization, and it could be an exercise where you talk to each team where customer data or even your staff data is being held, and that's a great starting point to at least identify how big is the problem. Because if you don't have a data classification to begin with, you're probably looking at like that you're going to be, I guess, a lost puppy, for lack of a better word, in the middle of nowhere, and you're going to have a starting point. And I usually found that my grounding point was that where I at least knew what the data classification was. So my risk profile was based on the kind of data an application is storing as well, and having an understanding of not just, hey, if this is a moneymaker application for our organization, but also classifying it with the kind of data it would have access to, so that the next time another zero-day vulnerability comes out, the two metrics that you probably want to work with should include the data conversation in there as well. Because if just because it's not a moneymaker app, but it probably has the most sensitive data in there, you probably want to check that system for making sure it's not affected by zero-day.
That's great advice. Often the hardest question is, where do I start? I have all these daunting concerns. Where do I get started? I know that we at Dasera would love to help them start on their journey towards discovery or classification and understanding of their sensitive data. And I would recommend for all of them that they check out your cloud security podcast and listen to a couple of episodes. Hopefully check out our website, learn more about Dasera. Ashish, many thank yous for your time and getting to reverse the interview position and get to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me, April. It was really lovely talking to you.
It was nice to meet you. Bye.
You as well. Bye.